Hi all, welcome back to Tallulah Talks. Apologies, today is not Saturday, it is Sunday. I haven't been feeling too well the last couple of days, and so I decided not to film yesterday. But fear not, I decided to film today and upload today, and just for this week, it's going to be Sunday's Haunting Hour. So I do apologise. Also, my boyfriend has occasionally been here when I've been filming, and he said that I've been talking too fast. So I'm going to try and slow down how I speak. And also, as you've noted in previous videos, I do have a bird. He is very noisy. You probably will hear him at some point. He does like to make a lot of noise. All that aside, we have a very, very, very interesting story today. I am going to talk you through the true events that inspired The Conjuring and the Conjuring universe. So if you haven't seen The Conjuring, it is basically about this family of 7, mum, dad, 5 girls, who move into a rural farmhouse in Harrisville. And the movie kind of starts off, the dog just point blank refuses to go into the house. That is your first warning sign. And also, as they live there, the timeline's only like a few months, and as they live there, they hear and see things go missing or get misplaced. And as the movie progresses, there is one spirit in particular that seems very attached, I guess, to Carolyn, the mother. And she terrorizes this poor woman. In the movie, the woman is possessed at one point, and the Warrens get called in. So Ed and Lorraine Warren, if you don't know who they are, paranormal investigators, and they performed an exorcism. It didn't work, and so they had to remove the spirit from Carolyn in a different way. And in the end of the movie, the family are getting ready to move elsewhere. Let's get to the real events. And as usual, book of stories, because my memory is just rubbish. So as opposed to the movie, in real life, the events take place over the course of nearly 10 years, because people can't just buy a house and then get creeped out and buy another house. A lot of people aren't in that situation where they can do that. So in 1971, the Perrin family moved into an old farmhouse in Harrisville, and like I said, it was a family of 7. From the get-go, the dog absolutely refused to go in the house, and that is definitely a sign that you do not want to live there. If a pet doesn't go in the house, you need to get your money back, because I wouldn't be going in there either. So Carolyn, the mother, would notice that items would go missing around the house, or they would be moved around on their own, and she would also hear the sound of scraping on the kettle or kitchen appliances when no one else was really around. She would also find like small piles of dirt where she had just cleaned. So at like 1 minute the floor was spotless, the next there would be this random pile of dirt. The children also began to notice the spirits around the house, but these were like mostly harmless spirits. A lot of people had died in that house. It had been built in, I think it was the 16 or 1700s. So as you can imagine, a lot of people would have died within that home over the course of, you're talking like 300 years. Carolyn then went and did research on the history of the house. And it had actually been in the same family for 8 generations. And so they were a completely different family moving into this house. And many of the previous families had died under mysterious circumstances, or very, very horrible circumstances, suicides, murders, hangings. And there was really no explanation for those, because there were children that also died in the house. And it was actually found out that some of the children had hung themselves in the attics, and that's not something typically children would do. So that's why we say it's like mysterious circumstances. Um, the worst spirit that they did encounter was a spirit called Bathsheba. Um, she viewed herself as the mistress of the house, and it was kind of theory put forward that she was threatened by Carolyn's presence because she was the mother of the home. The previous owners had actually warned the Perrin family to leave the lights on at night. The children would have toys misplaced and go missing, and then they would blame each other because obviously there was 5 of them. But however, when one of the sisters was left alone in the house and the toys were going missing and being misplaced, it was then that, like, it was obviously the spirits that were doing this, but these were just the harmless spirits. These were probably the children. And then one of the daughters, Cindy, she actually began making friends with the spirits of the children that had died. The Perrin family lived there for nearly 10 years with constant unexplained noises and objects going missing. And they actually once experienced the very strong stench of like rotten flesh. And they would also see the apparition of a woman with like a crooked neck. They described it as, it was like she had hung herself and the neck was just constantly at an odd angle where it was like broken, and the whole family saw this woman. And in 1973, this was when things became really dangerous for the family. When this took place, Lorraine and Ed Warren were actually called upon by the local community. It wasn't the family themselves, it was the local community who had known what was happening and called upon the Warrens to come and investigate. So, they had a look around, and Lorraine said that the worst spirit was this Bathsheba woman, and basically she explained that Bathsheba was a witch and that she was known to make sacrifices to Satan in order for some sort of deal. We're not really sure what the deal was. She actually sacrificed her own child as a sacrifice to Satan, and there was also a rumour that as she was looking after a neighbour's daughter, this child died under mysterious circumstances, but it was thought that this was another sacrifice. And Bathsheba actually then hung herself a couple of years later, and this would explain the crooked neck of the apparition that everyone in the family were seeing. And it was kind of believed that this was like a final sacrifice for Satan to take her soul. So when the Warrens came, they decided to try and conduct an exorcism on the house because no one was possessed at that point. But during this time, Lorraine believed that Bathsheba had taken over Carolyn's body. Carolyn was then possessed. It was said that she levitated and spoke in an unknown language, and the spirit also threw Carolyn to the floor. They managed to get the spirit out of her. However, Carolyn doesn't remember any of this happening, but I believe the children witnessed it. And again, Lorraine did believe this spirit to be Bathsheba, because Lorraine could communicate with spirits, or it said she could communicate with spirits. Andrea Perrin was one of the daughters, and she actually believed that the spirit with the broken neck was not Bathsheba. She had this really strong belief that Bathsheba was not the dangerous spirit, that it had to have been some other spirit, and she goes into more detail on her book. I think it's called House of Light and Dark, and I'll tag it in the YouTube video, and you guys can go and buy it. It was found that the house was originally built in 1763, and like I said, 8 generations of the same family had lived and died in that house. Doors would slam, beds would shake. Many of the spirits in that house were non-violent. The youngest daughter, April, actually befriended a spirit who called himself Oliver, and he lived in her closet. There were spirits that were angry and violent, but this spirit just attached itself to Carolyn, and Carolyn would wake up to see a very tall grey woman with a broken neck, which must have been terrifying. Hangers would fly at Carolyn's head, and at one point, because it was quite an old house, there was like a scythe hanging on the wall, and Carolyn was underneath this, and the scythe came loose and very nearly cut her head. And one of the daughters was actually smacked to the floor by a spirit. So, like I said, the Warrens were then enlisted by the local community. They knew nothing of the haunting prior, and through research they found that Bathsheba Sherman had owned the house in the 1800s, and that she was rumoured to be quite a dangerous woman. She was known to be a practicing Satanist, and discovered that she did murder or sacrifice her own daughter. And prior to the Perrin family, generations of the Arnold family had lived in the home, but many of them met very violent deaths. And like I said earlier, this included hanging, suicide, and murder. So it's not surprising that the house was filled with spirits. At night, the girls experienced being pulled from their beds and having their hair pulled as they slept. One spirit in particular would scare Cindy by telling her that there were bodies in the walls. It was found that Bathsheba had also been involved in the death of a neighbour's child, and that did what I said earlier. And Bathsheba, or what the family believed other than Andrea, presented herself to each and every family member, but just paid particular attention to Carolyn. Carolyn would feel pinching and feel the sensation of being slapped, and she also began to feel pain in her legs, and it turned out that there were actually puncture and teeth marks within her legs. So it wasn't very safe for her, unfortunately. By 1980, and after getting the Warrens in, I think the violent spirits stopped, but the house was still pretty active. And after nearly 10 years, they decided to leave, and only Nancy, one of the daughters, stayed for, I think it was like a year. The family moved to Georgia, and Nancy and Andrea stayed for another year in the house. I'm not sure why. I think they just felt very connected to this house. They had lived there for a long time. And the sisters, many of the sisters and the father would visit the house to take part in a paranormal investigation years later. And again, the house was still very active. I think the daughters still visit the house from time to time. 40 years later, a lot of the family still do feel very connected to this house, because again, they did live there for nearly 10 years. They connected with some of the children's spirits. I'm not sure if the mother ever went back, but I do know the father and all the girls all went back. As of 2019, there are new owners of the house. They are Corey and Jennifer Heinzen, and they now own the property. And they have actually managed to capture many instances of paranormal activity. So I think Bathsheba, I don't think her spirit is any longer within the house, because there's not been any reports of violence from certain spirits. But yeah, that is the really scary story of what's now known as the Conjuring house, and the Perrin family who sadly went through all those events. And yeah, these are things that I'm always quite interested in. And if you know of any hauntings or stories that you would like me to tell, definitely leave me a comment in the comment box. And yeah, if this is the sort of thing that you like to hear, usually every single Saturday, I am here telling the true events of these spirit stories. And And if this is the kind of content you like, definitely hit that subscribe button, and I will see you on Wednesday for Serial Killer Wednesday. Bye.